Drunk Dog Creative. Today I'm going to show you how to do a multi-panel textured Easter card. Now this card can be used for any occasion, using any colors, any papers, any kind of embellishments you want. But it's Easter in a couple of weeks, so I'm going to go with an Easter theme. These are a couple examples trying to use up some DSP from my stash, but I'm going to do one for you in a different color combination and show you some different options. Now, the original idea for this came from Jan B. Cards, and it was a New Horizons masculine card. On her blog, she gives you the US sizing and the sizing for a 6" by 6" card. I've adapted it for the Australian A6 card, which is a different size to the standard American card, which is A2, and of course very different from a 6" by 6". So I'm only going to give you on this video and on my blog at drunkdogcreative.com the American measurements, but I'll put a link on the blog to Jan's original post so that you can get the American and the 6 by 6 measurements. Because I have to give credit where credit is due, and the idea came from her blog. So I've adapted it for the Australian A6 card, and I'm going to teach you how to do this. So let's talk about the cut file. Now, when I made these cards, I used the A4, the basic white A4 thick cardstock. And most cards you would make, you would do it with white, a color, white, and then your panels. But I want to use this absolutely beautiful DSP from the Painted Lavender set, and I think it needed a different approach. So I am using Crumb Cake DSP with Pretty Peacock DSP and Very Vanilla. So let's talk about the cut file. Your card base is going to be 210 wide by 148 tall. That's in millimeters, scored at 105 along the 210, and then folded in half. And if you have a bone folder, go ahead and give that a good crease. That's the basic Australian A6 card side. It's half of an A4 sheet of paper. So 210 by 148. Your first mat, which I've done in the Pretty Peacock, is going to be 143 by 100, because this is a landscape card. And then your card front is going to be 138 by 95. And that will eventually sit there. And then we're going to do some interesting stuff with the front. Now, the inside, of course, you can always just write on that. It's light enough. But I find that when you have a heavy front, it doesn't always stand up and the card can fall over. So I've also cut a piece of Pretty Peacock that is 143 by 100, and a piece of Very Vanilla that is 138 by 95 to go on the inside. That's optional, of course, and we'll talk about that later. That's the easy part. The hard part is the variegated front, and I'm going to chat to you a bit about that now. You can take any sort of DSP that you have lying around, and you're going to cut it into strips. Now, what I've done is I've created a frame, and again, this was an idea from Jan B, where the basic measurement of what you need to cut the DSP to is the inside, and then there's about 1.5 centimeters around. That way, I can sort of line this up and decide where I want in the DSP for my cuts to be. Especially if it's patterned. And I'll show you why that's important. Because you're going to cut them into strips. And this is the very confusing part. And I had a hard time working it out. So I've decided to just do it this way so you can actually see it. So as you can see, that is roughly that. I didn't do this one real exact, but it just close. That'll tell me. So that tells me where on the DSP I want to focus for my picture. right? And once you've decided, this one was really easy for purposes because it is a fairly same all the way across. But you're going to cut your DSP wherever you decide to cut it at 109 millimeters wide and 89 millimeters tall. And the map that you're going to use behind each of the pieces, you're going to cut at 137 millimeters wide and 93 millimeters tall. And these are all very odd sizes, but at the end of the day, it'll work, trust me. Now let's talk about cutting the map first because it's the easiest. Because it's plain, it doesn't matter which end you take the cut from. So you're going to cut 4 pieces from this that are 17 millimeters wide. So what I did is, if you can see my paper trimmer, I lined the right edge up to the 17 mark over here, put it down and cut 4 of those to get those 4 pieces. Then I cut 2 pieces that were 20 millimeters wide, still keep pushing it over, and then you should be left with a 29 millimeter wide piece. The thing is, if you're not cutting absolutely precise, this last piece could end up being slightly wider, in which case, if you're left with like 30 millimeters, you're going to want to actually take that 1 millimeter off. So you may be left with a tiny bit at the end, depending on how precise the other cuts were, but make sure that middle piece is the 29. And then you're going to cut, of all those strips, pieces off the bottom. And like I said, it's much easier with the cardstock than it will be with the DSP. So on 2 of the 17 millimeter strips, 1 and 7, you're going to cut 38 millimeters off of it and put it aside. You don't need it. Of strips 2 and 6, which are 20 millimeters wide, you're going to cut 26 millimeters off the bottom. Strips 3 and 5, which are 17 millimeters wide, you're going to cut 14 millimeters off the bottom, and you're going to leave the middle one alone. And the reason I've got this sideways to the numbers is to show, I should have done it this way, show that pretending this is all in individual strips, that's what you would cut off each of them so that you end up with strips these sizes. Now these are the ones I've done, and this will show you. These were originally strips 1 and 7. So they were cut 17 millimeters wide, and then I put it through until it lined up with the 38, and then I cut it, and what I was left with was the right length. Can you see that? I know that sounds confusing, but if you look at it, look at this diagram, that should make it easier. Now that's the plain matting for the panels. That's easier. When you get to, put this away, the actual picture, you need to take it off the top and the bottom so that the image still lines up. So the idea is kind of like a triptych, which is like 3 panels of art that all form one piece. You don't want to cut just from the bottom, because then when you go to center it, you'll lose your pattern. And if you're using something like, say, this kind of paper, where it's an actual picture, you decide, what part do you want? You want to keep the center line even across all the panels. So this should give you an idea of what I mean. You want to keep the image even across all of the panels, wherever you put that. So you have to take from the top and bottom. So I took this piece and I cut it 1 panel at a time. I didn't do like 4 like with the other, because you need to keep it in the same order because of the pattern. So I lined up on this side of my paper trimmer at the 13 mil and cut. And then the next one is 16 mils, so I moved it over to the 16 and cut. The next one is a 13, then a 25, then a 13, then a 16, then a 13. And again, check that that last one really is 13. Let me demonstrate. So if I've got a piece like this where it really is a picture and I want to keep it all together, I need to decide what the picture that I'm doing is. And I actually want it to focus on this road. So I'm going to put that right at the edge. And that's the bit I'm going to want to keep in focus. So I'm going to take a pencil and I'm just going to mark those lines and mark the corner. And I know that my frame isn't exact, but it gives me an idea of where to make kind of the first judgment cut. If I can see the mark. Yeah, okay, so it's there. So I'm gonna just make that first cut at the bottom bit there. Take that off. Then I'm gonna want this to be 89. I'm going to want to put this at the 89 mark from the edge I just cut, so I get the right height. So that gives me, you can see it's the same, I've got the 89, and then I want this to be 109 from this edge. So I'm just going to flip it around and put this over at the 109 and cut that piece off. So now I've got the basic piece to cut into my strips. The picture of that's 109 by 89 kind of fits in there. So how I'm going to cut these strips then is to follow this plan. The first strip is 13. So I'm going to cut one at 13. And I tend to put them down here in order because you don't want them to get mixed up or your picture won't work. The next one is 16. The next one is 13. You can see that I have numbers on this side as well as this side, which is really useful for this sort of thing. The middle one is 25 millimeters. The next one is 13. The next one is 16. This is where it starts getting a little hard to cut. And it should leave me with 13 unless I've been off by a little bit somewhere. So I'm just going to check it. Yeah, there's just a tiny bit left over. Be very careful how you do this. I'm just going to take that little millimeter off. And then I've got my strips. And when you put them down, make sure they're the right way around and on the right side so that you can line them all up again. So they still make a complete picture, but now I've got to take the tops and bottoms off. You can take the two outside and try to cut them at the same time. I don't recommend it because they can slip and you can miss it. And it's a little tedious this way, but I know I need to take 19 millimeters off each end of the two outside strips. I'm going to take 19 off there and 19 off there. And I need to do the same on the other one. And this is why you want to keep them in order, because you don't want to mix this part up. Believe me, I've done it numerous times. You do not want to mix this part up. You want it to stay. So this one also has to have 19 off. This is the far left one. So this is the most tedious part of the process. Once this is done, you're done. Then you take the next two outside ones and you take 13 millimeters off each end. That's 2 done, 3 to go. Then the next one, you're going to take 7 millimeters off each end. And try to be as precise as you can. It'll make it much easier to line them all up later. There you go. And luckily, you don't take anything off the middle one. Hallelujah, I hear everybody say. All right, so I'm gonna take these strips and just keep them in order. Very important not to mix left and right and up and down, down, which is why I always try to, sorry, put that away, keep them in order wherever I can. Now, if you take a look using this card, you'll see that now these line up on their mats. There should be 4 millimeters, so 2 millimeters each side, excess from the strips themselves. All right, so if you've gotten this far, that's the worst part done. And you see, if I had just taken it off one end, the picture wouldn't necessarily line up, but it will because I've taken them off each end. Now we line these up along a center line. It'll be easy to do once they're all put together. You've got your, it's probably not the color I would use with this actual DSP, but it'll give you the idea. And I'm not gluing them down, so they'll be a bit fiddly right now, but it's just to give you the idea before we go and actually do the other one. All right, so then they're centered. So cutting this is the hardest part. And once you've done that, you've done the hard part. The rest is just putting it all together, which is a lot of fun. So let me move the templates out of the way and let's talk about how we do this. So the first thing obviously is to get our mat put on our card front. I'm gonna just use my Stamp and Seal around the edges. And I always put a little dot in the middle. And remember, it's a landscape card. So it's sideways. So I've done that. The next thing I'm going to do is take my card front, which goes there, and I'm going to emboss it. And I'm using this beautiful embossing folder. There are bits everywhere. This is the painted texture embossing folder from the current annual catalog, which finishes in April. And it gives this beautiful painted finish. So I'm just going to take a minute and step over to my embossing machine or my die cutting machine, and I will be right back. And I'm back with my embossed card front in that beautiful painted texture, which I think is the right texture to go with this DSP. So I'm not going to put it on the card front yet, but I just wanted to see how it lines up. Now comes the interesting part. So what you're going to want to do is mark the center of this with a pencil. So 69 millimeters would be the halfway point. Helps if my pencil actually works. Of the 138 wide. Because I want to get my middle piece done right. So I'm going to set that aside, and I'm now going to affix all of these to the matting. And so I highly recommend using glue, and I've just ran out of my wonderful Tombow from Stampin' Up, so I'm going to have to just use another glue that I've got here. I cannot find where I put my spare one. So I've got some glue on there. And then I'm going to want to center it on the corresponding mat and make sure that there's about an even 2 millimeters all the way around the edge. And then put that up. And then I tend to do them in order, so one from each side. Now, hopefully, if I bring this down a little, you can see that if I line them up kind of centered, you can see that the picture continues. Even with the mat interrupting, your brain still gets a sense of the whole picture if you line it up the right way. And that's why you have to cut off the top and the bottom so that that center line stays. The next thing is to put them all onto here. Now, you can just use tape and glue it flat on, but if you want some dimension, I would use dimensionals to affix them. And Stampin' Up! Makes dimensionals in this normal size, in a mini size, and in black. And this is, again, my favorite tool. It's my Take My Pick that has all different things it does, but I find it easy to use the dimensionals with this. You start with your middle one. You're going to need a dimensional right at each end, as close to the end as you can get it so that it doesn't curl up. And on the bigger ones, one in the middle. So I've got my 3 there. Just peel those off. This is where I'm going to take the center of this and align it to the very center on the card. And this piece should take up almost all of the card front. There'll be just a millimeter top and bottom. So you want to take your eraser in there afterwards and get rid of that pencil mark. And if it's not quite straight, you want to pick it up. And that's what this is good for, to not rip your paper. Sorry. And just take the 2 up. I'm just lifting it with the pick and just making sure that that is straight. Okay, once that's straight, you start building from each side, one side then the other. Again, you want your dimensional right at the end so it doesn't curl. If it's a longer one, you probably want to support one in the middle. You can use foam tape, you can use normal glue, normal adhesive if you want it to lie flat. But you also want to bring the mat as close to the next mat without much space. And you want to make sure that the picture starts to line up. So one left then right or right then left, but it's better to do back and forth rather than all one side and all the other. So there, you have your picture across the front, but matted and kind of stepping down to make it a multi-panel picture. And then you just attach this to the front of your card. And I'm going to use my Stampin' Seal. Make sure I've got it the right way. Do you know there's a number of times when I've accidentally done them upside down? It happens. So now I'm going to center that as best I can there. And honestly, you could leave it at that. You don't have to add a sentiment. You don't have to add anything to the front. You can just leave it there. Or you can step it up a bit and do some other things with it, which I'm going to show you next. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the inside together. And I've decided you can either just do it square like this, that's fine, or you can round the edges off, or use the Very Best Trio to cut fancy corners. I'm going to round the edges for both the mat and the writing area. And I've done Very Vanilla for the writing area because I think it tones better with the crumb cake and the pretty peacock in this particular case. So I'm just using a corner rounder. This isn't made by Stampin' Up. I wish Stampin' Up would make one. I really do. I would love it if they did. So you can see that gives it a nice kind of rounded look. I'm just going to take my Stampin' Seal. And X marks the spot. Just put that in, and then again. I'm going to put that inside the card so that you have a nice inside that has a similar weight to the front so that it stands up without falling over, which can happen if the back is a lighter weight. So now that that's done, I'm going to talk about sentiments. For these, I just simply did a double stack sentiment. I glued some ribbon down in it, folded it in thirds, glued it down and put the sentiment on top using dimensionals. So that was glued down. That was Stampin' Seal to put the top layer on, but the whole thing was done with dimensionals. And I put a couple of embellishments on that one, which I didn't do on this one. So that's how those were done. But I want to do something a little different with this one. I've got an Easter bunny. Is that not adorable? I'm going to do a little bonus video at the end for how I made this. But again, this is something available in the current catalog that will be finished in April, and it's the Easter Bunny set. These stamps, you can see they are well used and well loved. This little bunny has a punch that coordinates to punch it out, which is excellent. I'm also going to use the Happy Easter stamp. I'm embarrassed about how dirty they are, but I've been making about 20 Easter cards this week, and I used the same set last year. Now, you can always position an embellishment in the middle. I don't want to cover my butterflies though, so I'm probably going to put it down here. But I want to create a sentiment so I can decide how I'm going to stack it all up. And again, if you hang around to the end of the video, I'll add a bonus footage about how to make the little bunny. So I have cut 2 pieces of DSP, of cardstock. The very vanilla strip is 70 millimeters wide by about 19 millimeters tall, or I went back to Imperial for 3/4 of an inch tall. The matte for it is 80 millimeters wide by 25 millimeters tall, or 1 inch. And the reason I'm giving the Imperial for this one, I normally wouldn't, is because this is the punch I'm going to use. And this has grooves at 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, and 1 inch to help you guide it to make sure the punch is always centered. So 80 millimeters, 70 millimeters, 1 inch wide, 3/4 of an inch wide. I am going to punch just one edge. I'm going to use this one. I'm going to do just one edge to start on both of these. And Stampin' Up! Has a number of punches like these. Grab them while they're current, because once they're gone and a new catalog comes on, you'll regret not having them. These are fantastic punches. So you can see how that can line up, any width you want. I'll deal with this side afterwards. I'm going to stamp this with my very well used, well loved Happy Easter sentiment with a stamp block. I'm going to try it in the purple so that I tie in all these colors together. Again, just a light tap on the ink pad, and I'm going to line it up more toward that end rather than centered, although this looks like it'll center really well. Just tap it down, and let it go. And that's my sentiment. I'm going to just let that dry for a second before I tape it onto there. It does dry fast. I'm going to use my Stampin' Seal. So I'm going to affix my bunny here. Because there's quite a bit of dimension, I'm not going to build it up on dimensionals. I'm just going to use some Stampin' Seal. And I kind of want him to sit about there so he's like looking at that butterfly. So I'm not going to put my sentiment on the front of the card, because if I do, anything I do takes away from the design, mostly because of where that butterfly is. I would have really liked to have done it kind of there leading to the bunny. But if I put it up here, it breaks up the panels too much. So I'm going to do something a little different with this. I really wanted my bunny almost looking nose to the butterfly. So I'm going to open my inside. I'm going to put some Stampin' Seal on this. And I'm going to line this up so that it lines up the white vertically aligned to that. And I'm going to put it right there on the writing panel to add just a little bit of interest, and then you can write your Easter message. So you've got your bunny, you've got your beautiful little lavender, and then you've got your Happy Easter on the inside instead of on the outside. So that's how you do this paneled card. This card doesn't have to be for Easter. It can be used for anything. Birthdays, sympathy, whatever you want. But the idea is to have the card base and this card front the same color, embossed, with a colored mat that also forms a mat for whatever DSP you use for whatever sort of picture you want to create. So I'm doing another one of these cards, but this time a birthday card for a friend, and I thought I'd show you how to do the ribbon that was on the example card, since I changed my mind mid-video and put a bunny on the other one. This is Lemon Lolly ribbon from Stampin' Up. It's a lighter yellow, so I didn't want to exactly match the colors in the card. I wanted to go with something that was light and wouldn't take away from it. So basically how I do it is it's a 30 centimeter roughly piece of ribbon. I'm going to fold it in thirds. So one side up, one side down. And I'm going to kind of fiddle with it till I have it the length and configuration I want, with the idea being that it's sort of a figure 8. With the ends crossing over the middle. So the open ends cross over the middle, kind of like that, so that it makes a figure 8 with ribbons out each end. And I'm just going to put a little bit of glue in the middle of that middle panel, just a little bit, and you want glue that's going to dry clear for sure. And you just stick it down like that and let it dry, and you pull it up and get the angle right. Depending on what sentiment you're going to use, you might need to angle it more. So I've angled it a bit more there because my sentiment is going to go over it. And that's the beauty of glue, is you can fiddle with it until you have it how you want. But it's basically 30 centimeters folded in thirds toward the middle, with the ends on each side and the ribbon making kind of a figure 8. I'm also going to show you how I did the sentiment on the earlier cards that I showed you. I've pre-stamped and cut this. I basically, like I said in the cut plan, you cut tags. I usually make it about 1 centimeter longer than my sentiment stamp for the white, and that's 3/4 of an inch wide for the punch. I punched this one a little too close, but you get the idea. The punch takes off about 1/8 of an inch from each end. So if you give yourself, 1/2 inch or, 1 centimeter longer, you'll be about right. Then I've got a backing piece that I've cut to be 1 centimeter longer than my sentiment tag. And again, you can follow the cut measures in the plan, but if you're using a sentiment that's longer or shorter, so you can see I used Happy Easter, which is a shorter sentiment than this. This is that punch that I used that has the guides that I showed you earlier. I always punch looking at the back so I can make sure I've got that even. I'm going to just punch each edge off the back, the sentiment mat. Hopefully that'll be about the right length. Yep. If you want less space on either side of your sentiment, you can tighten it up and punch it a little smaller. It's all, what you want. So then I'm going to just use my Stampin' Seal and put this, center this on here. And then I'm going to use my dimensionals because I want to create a little bit more lift. You don't have to. You can just glue this straight down since you do have some height or dimension already in the card. You can do it either way. The other ones I just glued straight down. This one I'm going to add a little bit more height. And you just put it over the top of the ribbon. And that's how you do the ribbon on top of the panel card. Now the sentiment, just to let you know, is today is all about you, happy birthday, from the new Notes of Nature set. This is in the mini catalog, which ends very, very soon, so you might want to grab it quickly. I bought it as both a stamp and die bundle. Sorry, my voice is bad today. You can also buy it in a suite with all the very vanilla stuff, or you can just buy the stamp set. And this gives you some cool textures to play with, as well as actual items. I stamped the inside with this leaf because I thought it went very well with the theme of the retired DSP that I used on the front. But that's how you do the ribbon.